Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow and reach for your phone to check the news. Nothing loads. You try again. Same blank screen. You switch to Wi-Fi, switch to data, restart the phone. Nothing. You walk over to your laptop, maybe it's the phone. You open a browser and type in Google. Nothing. You try YouTube. Nothing. Twitter, Amazon, your work, email, the banking app, the map to get your kid to school. Nothing. 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 You glance outside. Your neighbor is standing in his driveway, staring at his phone with the exact same look on his face. And that's when it hits you. This isn't a you problem. The internet is gone. Not slow, not down. Gone. Today we're exploring one of the most genuinely terrifying questions of the modern age. What actually happens if the internet disappears completely, permanently, overnight? Before we can understand what breaking the internet looks like, we need to understand what the internet actually is, because most people think of it as a service, like electricity or running water. In reality, it's much stranger and more fragile than that. The internet isn't a single thing. It's a global ecosystem of roughly 40,000 interconnected networks owned by thousands of different private companies, governments, and institutions, all agreeing to route data through each other using a set of shared protocols. The most important of these is called the Border Gateway Protocol, or BGP. Think of BGP as the postal system for data. It's the system that says this packet of information needs to reach a server in Singapore. Here's the best route to get it there. It works because thousands of organizations are constantly updating each other on which routes exist and which ones are open. The backbone of all this is roughly 426 active undersea fiber optic cables, as of 2024, stretching nearly 1.3 million kilometers across the ocean floor. These carry roughly 95% of all international data traffic. Above ground, the infrastructure includes around 7 million kilometers of fiber in the United States alone, plus data centers, switching stations, cell towers, and satellites, hundreds of billions of dollars of physical infrastructure quietly humming away right now. Now here's the divergence point for our thought experiment. In our reality, the internet has never gone fully dark globally. Though regional outages do happen, a 2021 BGP misconfiguration took Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp offline for 6 hours, costing the company an estimated $60 million and causing minor chaos in regions where those platforms are the internet for many people. But what if, instead of 6 hours, it was permanent? What if tomorrow morning, every single one of those undersea cables was simultaneously severed? Every satellite deorbited, every routing protocol scrambled beyond recovery. Not a hack, not a natural disaster. Just gone. Full stop. The rules of our thought experiment: no partial restoration, no workarounds, no satellite internet. It's not slowed or restricted. The infrastructure is simply absent. Day one of a genuinely post-internet world. Let's follow the logic. The moment the internet disappears, the first thing that breaks isn't what you'd expect. It's not social media. It's time. Specifically, it's the global synchronization of time. Most of the world's clocks, from the computers in hospitals to the systems running financial exchanges, synchronize themselves using something called NTP, Network Time Protocol. Every few minutes, your computer quietly pings a time server somewhere in the world to make sure it hasn't drifted. Without internet, every device in the world starts running on its own internal clock. These clocks drift slowly at fierce milliseconds. 10 seconds. Within weeks, computers around the world would be running on slightly different times, and any software that depends on synchronized timestamps, which is basically all of it, would start behaving erratically. That might sound abstract, so here's what it means in practice. Encrypted communications break because they rely on synchronized clocks to validate certificates. Financial trades become impossible to sequence accurately, and air traffic control systems, many of which rely on networked data to track position and timing, would need to revert to much older manual procedures. The internet doesn't just carry information, It carries orders. The modern supply chain runs almost entirely on real-time networked inventory systems. When a grocery store sells a bag of rice, that transaction pings a warehouse. When a warehouse drops below threshold, it pings a supplier. When a supplier ships a truck, it pings a logistics routing system that navigates traffic in real time. All of that stops on day one. According to a 2023 World Economic Forum analysis of supply chain digitization, over 80% of global logistics operations now depend on internet-connected systems for real-time coordination. The trucks don't stop immediately. Drivers know where they're going, but within 24 to 48 hours, restocking orders stop flowing, inventory tracking freezes, and the invisible coordination that keeps supermarkets stocked, hospitals supplied, and fuel depots filled begins to seize up. Within a week, some urban areas would see shortages, not apocalyptic shortages. Not yet, but the kind that make people nervous. Empty shelves on certain items, gas stations struggling to confirm fuel levels, hospitals rationing supplies they can't reorder efficiently. Here's the deepest irony in our scenario. The power grid needs the internet too. Modern electrical grids are increasingly smart grids. They use network sensors to balance supply and demand across regions in real time. Without that communication layer, grid operators lose the ability to finely manage load balancing. They can still run the grid operators. Don't forget how to do their jobs, but the efficiency drops, and the risk of outages rises. A 2022 MIT Energy Initiative report noted that smart grid communications, many of which depend on internet connectivity, now account for critical monitoring functions in over 60% of U.S. grid infrastructure. Manual alternatives exist, but they require significantly more human operators and have lower precision. The cascade risk is real. Internet goes down, supply chains seize, hospitals scramble, power management becomes manual, some grids experience outages, and things get darker in both senses. Let's zoom in from civilization-scale catastrophe and ask a more relatable question. What does your Tuesday look like in a world without internet? You wake up. Your phone still works as a phone. Voice calls still run on cellular networks, which have their own infrastructure separate from the internet backbone. Texts still send. But no apps load, no Spotify, no podcasts, no Google Maps. You want to know if there's traffic on your commute? You have no idea. You drive and find out. You stop for coffee. The card machine doesn't work. Not because payments are internet dependent per se, but because the verification step that checks whether your card is valid and your account has funds runs through networked systems. Some point-of-sale systems have offline modes that work for a few hours using cached authorization data. But by day 2, cash only. Here's where things get quietly chaotic. Most people under 35 are carrying virtually no cash. A 2024 Federal Reserve survey found that only about 14% of U.S. adults use cash for most transactions. Suddenly, everyone needs to find an ATM. And ATMs are also networked. Many of them stop dispensing. The ones that do work, older models with more local processing, become immediately popular. The line outside your bank branch on day 1, around the block. For remote workers, roughly 28% of the U.S. workforce, as of 2024, work just stops. Not works less efficiently. Stops. No email, no Slack, no shared documents, no video calls, no cloud access. The entire infrastructure of remote work evaporates overnight. For office workers, it's not much better. Virtually every white-collar workplace in 2025 depends on cloud services, Office 365, Google Workspace, Salesforce, Zoom. None of it works. For the first week, a lot of companies would essentially just pause. People would show up, make phone calls, write things on paper, and wait. There's a dark comedy here worth savoring. Entire industries whose whole purpose is digital social media companies, streaming services, app developers, digital advertising firms simply cease to have a function, not struggle to operate. Their entire reason for existing is gone. The valuation of every tech company on Earth drops to whatever their physical assets are worth. That server farm in Iowa, it's just a very expensive warehouse now. Here's where something genuinely interesting happens. Within days, people start rediscovering things they forgot existed. Libraries see foot traffic they haven't seen in decades. Physical books, physical maps, physical insect. Local newspapers, the handful that still print physical editions, become extraordinarily valuable. Radio becomes the primary mass communication medium again. Essentially overnight, people with ham radio licenses become local celebrities. Your uncle who never stopped reading physical maps is suddenly the most useful person in the neighborhood. Physical communities start mattering more immediately. If you want to know what's happening in your town, you have to talk to people. Literally, talk to them. In person. The horror. One of the most dramatic shifts in a post-internet world wouldn't be technological, it would be political. The internet has acted as a massive decentralizer of power. Any individual can broadcast to millions. Grassroots movements can organize globally overnight. Whistleblowers can publish, dissidents can communicate. Without it, power flows back toward whoever controls physical infrastructure, broadcast towers, printing presses, phone networks, roads. Governments that have spent decades trying to control internet speech would find themselves suddenly holding all the cards. Local and national broadcasters, whoever controls radio and television transmission, would have a monopoly on mass communication again. Independent journalism, which has largely migrated online, would face an existential crisis. The printed pamphlet would make a comeback. This cuts both ways. Authoritarian governments would gain enormous control over information, but so would hyperlocal community organizing. The kind that doesn't need global platforms, just neighborhood trust. Do you think local businesses would thrive or collapse in a post-internet world? Argue your case below. The economic implications are staggering. And here's where we get to some genuinely debate-worthy territory. Economists estimate that the internet contributes between 6 and 10% of GDP in developed economies, and that figure is almost certainly an undercount of the indirect dependencies. Everything from logistics to finance to manufacturing, scheduling to medical record-keeping runs on internet infrastructure. The immediate economic disruption would be severe. But here's the counterintuitive argument some economists have made. Local businesses might actually benefit over time. Amazon can't ship to you if it can't process orders or route trucks in real time. Your local hardware store, which survived the Amazon era barely, suddenly has no competition from anything that isn't physically nearby. Small farms sell locally because there's no global just-in-time supply chain undercutting them. Main Street has a renaissance, not because anyone wanted it, but because geography matters again. Fashion changes. Without Instagram's relentless trend cycle, fashion probably slows down dramatically. Trend diffusion goes back to the pace of physical magazines and word of mouth, meaning styles stick around for years instead of months. Architecture changes. Data centers, enormous, nondescript buildings, consuming up to 2% of global electricity, become useless. That's hundreds of millions of square feet of suddenly available real estate, many of it in or near major cities. Human attention spans, well, studies suggest they might actually recover. A 2023 UC San Francisco analysis suggested that heavy internet use has measurably altered patterns of sustained attention. Without infinite scroll and algorithmic content feeds, people read longer texts. Again, sit with thoughts longer, tolerate boredom. Whether that's good or bad depends entirely on your perspective and where you fell on the boredom spectrum before all this. We've had some fun with the local hardware store renaissance angle, but let's be honest about what a genuinely internet-free world would look like for the majority of humanity, because it wouldn't be good. The internet is, among many other things, the infrastructure through which billions of people access healthcare information, emergency services coordination, weather warnings, education, and economic participation. In sub-Saharan Africa, mobile internet has become one of the primary means of financial inclusion. Mobile payment systems, like M-Pesa, have brought banking to hundreds of millions of people who never had formal bank accounts. That disappears. Telemedicine, which has exploded since 2020 and now serves as primary care for millions in rural areas. Gone. Remote patient monitoring for diabetics, cardiac patients, people with chronic conditions, gone. We should also be honest. We don't actually know what the cascading failures would look like, because nothing like this has ever happened. The 2003 Northeast blackout, which affected 55 million people for up to 2 days, gives us some data. Disruption was severe, but manageable. The internet disappearing would be orders of magnitude larger in scope and duration. What we can say with confidence, from studying prior infrastructure collapses and from experts like those at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, is that the most vulnerable populations, the elderly, the rural, the economically marginalized, would bear the heaviest costs and bear them first. This isn't a level playing field catastrophe. It never is. So here's the question that stays with us after running this thought experiment. The internet has been around in meaningful public form for about 30 years. That's one generation. In that single generation, we've built a global civilization whose food, medicine, money, communication, and social fabric all run through a single technological layer. A layer that is, at its deepest level, a voluntary agreement between thousands of private organizations to route packets through each other. What does that tell us about ourselves? On one hand, it's a remarkable story of cooperation. The internet works billions of times per second because human beings and their institutions are, at SUMI level, remarkably good at building shared systems. The BGP protocol, the postal system for data we talked about, survives because it's in everyone's interest for it to survive. On the other hand, we've done something arguably unprecedented in human history. We've made ourselves dependent on a single, invisible infrastructure with no real backup. Not since the invention of agriculture, which created civilizations by also making them vulnerable to famine, have humans made a bet this large on a single system. The philosopher Nassim Taleb calls these fragile systems the ones that look stable right up until they aren't. And perhaps the most important question our thought experiment raises isn't what if it disappeared, but why haven't we built redundancy? Some technologists working on mesh networks, community-owned fiber, low-orbit satellite systems are quietly trying to answer that question. Whether the rest of us pay attention might be the most important tech policy question of the next decade. Is the internet a fragile system that civilization has bet too much on? Or is the real resilience story that it's survived and kept growing for 30 years? We want to hear your argument in the comments. The internet is, at this moment, simultaneously the most powerful and most fragile thing human civilization has ever built. And most of us are going to pick up our phones the second this video ends without thinking about that for even a second longer. So, what's the first thing you would do if the internet disappeared tomorrow? Would you adapt? Or would you panic? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. If this made you think, hit subscribe. We've got more alternate theories incoming, and some of them are going to be even harder to shake. Stay curious.